welcome Rona.
Thank you.
I'm quite pleased that Rona's here. Some of you may or may not know, Rona, you were doing a skydive on Saturday.
I was,
That
yes.
was quite scary for me as an interviewer, thinking, are you going to be here? And if you're here, will you be, in any fit state? But how was that? And why were you skydiving on Saturday?
Well, I was skydiving to help raise money for a building that has been built in the Highlands of Scotland for children with disabilities and their families. And I can honestly say it was a wonderful experience, but I won't be repeating it.
You're here tonight to tell us your life story. I mean, there's so much in your life. We really could have like 6 life stories with your life. But we're focusing on particularly your early 20s. You were a nanny and you had gone to Canada. That sounds quite adventurous. What caused you to do that and what were you doing there exactly?
So I was always quite adventurous and I was very eager to go to another country. I had trained as a children's nurse and nursery nurse, and I really wanted to go and travel. So the best way to do that was to be a nanny. So at 21, I took off to Canada to be a nanny. And actually I left home saying to my closest of friends, they were saying, why are you leaving Scotland? And I said, I'm definitely going to look for life. And when I find what I'm looking for, I'll come back and tell you. But I didn't envisage what would take place there.
Okay, that's beefing it up. So you were in Canada. You'd gone home for Christmas. You'd worked there for what, 7 or 8 months, looking after 3 children. Lovely family as you saw it. It was all going well. So you went home for Christmas, came back in the new year, and tell us what happened next.
Yeah, so I arrived back in Toronto, and it was actually a very, very cold Toronto. It was one of the worst winters, snow that they had in many, many years. So we came down to land and we got told that there was a lot of snow. So while I was collecting my luggage, a guard, but I didn't know it was a guard, it looked like a policeman, stopped me and asked if I was Rona Mackenzie, which I was before I was married, and could they see my passport. And I give them my passport and they said, okay, you must come with us. And from there I was basically arrested because they told me that they had received a phone call to say that I would be arriving in on that flight and I would be carrying illegal drugs. So I was searched and all my luggage was searched. So it was a very frightening experience, and I kept saying to them, no, I think you've got the wrong person, because I was imagining I came from a small village up in the Highlands of Scotland, and yeah, it was a different world to be accused of drugs. So that was scary.
Yeah. So they took your passport. What happened next? You went to stay with someone because the people you'd been working for weren't at home?
So the people I worked for, they tried to contact and they weren't there. And that was the world, when we didn't have mobiles and nobody was instantly available. And it was in between Christmas and New Year. But because I was being accused of such a crime, a big crime of carrying or exporting drugs, they asked me if I knew any Canadian citizens that would vouch for me. And I had one friend who was a nanny, and her employers knew me very well. So I phoned them and they vouched for me. And so I was put under house arrest. So I was allowed to go to their home until the case was brought forward. But I was to remain at their house. And that was the only way I was released that day. Otherwise, they would have kept me in a cell until the process was going through.
Wow. So just that sounds bad enough to me, but just as that was unfolding, then more things came out. So tell us about what happened next for you, Rona.
So I was out and about waiting so they kept my passport. So I went looking for my family. I went back to the family house after the holiday, but there was nobody there. And a neighbour let me know that they had been coming and going and emptying the house. And all my belongings at 21, okay, you don't have so much. But for my generation, when you were 21, you got all your gold and expensive stuff from all watches and fab things. And they were all in there. And so all my belongings had been in the house. So they had disappeared, basically. They were disappearing. And the neighbour told me that they hadn't seen them much except for emptying the house. So that was a challenge because I couldn't reach them. I tried to phone them, they weren't answering. And it was difficult because I also had a visa that was due to run out in a matter of a couple of weeks. And the only way you got to remain in Canada was while you had a work visa. And to get a new job, you had to have your employers release you from employment so that you could get a new job. So I wasn't getting my employers at home, and I didn't have anything to say that I worked with them. So it was getting nearer to my court appearance for my visa, but while I was still under arrest for drugs, that was a very difficult situation.
So tell us what happened. Tell us about the fire.
So what happened was that after a very short time, I discovered, I assumed that they didn't want me back into employment. And that's a bit of another story because I was very fond of them. So I started to look for other work. While I was looking for work, you can imagine it was a bit difficult because you would get interviews, and then I'd say, oh, by the way, I don't have my passport because the police have it because I'm accused of burning down my last employer's house. So they're like, oh, we'll phone you. And it was very difficult to get a job.
But you hadn't tell us about the fire then, because you haven't told us about the fire.
So, well, that happened before I was trying to get a visa, and then on one occasion, while I was doing odd jobs for people cleaning their houses, two policemen came to my friend's house, which I was under arrest in, and I thought they were going to come and tell me the case had reached and I had to appear. However, they said, are you Rona Mackenzie? I said, yes. And they said, okay, do you know? And they named my employers. I said, yes. Have you found them? And they said, no, a most unfortunate circumstance has happened in that their house is burnt to the ground and you're number one suspect of arson. And you have the right to remain silent, but anything you say will be written down in evidence against you. So I was taken away that day in the back of a big police car. I had a very funny thought at the time because I was sitting in the back of the police car not knowing where I'd go, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, the only time I ever had contact with police was when I received my cycling proficiency certificate in primary school. Here I was arrested in Canada. But that was a very frightening day. I remained all day with the police, and they knew that I'd been accused of drugs. So while I was in the police station, I realised this must be my employers have set me up, and they were hopeful that I'd be arrested at the airport and kept. But that didn't happen, and this was the next phase. But I had no idea why. And the police were pushing me. You're trying to get revenge. And I was saying, no, I didn't. They have no reason. I liked them. I worked hard for them. So that was and they made me feel very, very, with their questioning, it became like I am guilty. And it was very, very frightening. And at that point, I really questioned about life because I was a very happy-go-lucky person. I really enjoyed life. I had lots of friends, but this was way beyond. I knew that this was something way out of my control and I couldn't do anything. And my parents were loving parents, but I couldn't tell them because they were back in Scotland. It was so far away and I didn't want to worry them. And then I started to panic. Okay, if I get put in prison, my parents are going to think I lied to them and I hid this from them. So it was a very distressing time.
So Rona, I mean, a lot of us can think, how do you come through that? Now, I know you weren't a Christian at the time. You're a believer now. You've got faith. You're a Christian, but you weren't at the time, were you? So tell us about your journey to faith and how that dark time brought that out for you.
So it was very, very, very hard, and I'd always believed there was a God. So from a child, that's what I heard. That's what I was taught. I had that through school. So I never doubted the story of Jesus coming and his birth. I never doubted that he rose again from the grave. But I just believed that was cool. That was nice. That was good. I heard about Christians. I knew about Christians. But I thought that's for them. You know, I have a really happy life. I thought God was somewhere way out there and not interested in me. And for the first time in my life, when I was desperate, absolutely at the end of the road, nobody could help me. My friend kept telling me I was good, I was In fact, some of their reaction was, let's get them, let's go and find them and beat them up. And, I came from quite a good home, so I didn't find that sat well with me. But there was no answer. Nobody that I loved could give me an answer. And so I was really, nobody could help me. It was out of our control. It was too expensive to go and get a lawyer because I didn't have that money. So I was desperate. And in the evening that I was arrested, I cried non-stop for hours, and I was very scared. And I started to call out to God, why are you letting this happen? Why would you allow this to happen? And I didn't do it. And then I said to God, but if you are God, you must see, and you could stop all this. And in that darkest of time, with a lot of tears, in a basement room that belonged to my friend, and I in that crying out, I started to say, "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want." And I had learned Psalm 23 probably as a child, but if you had asked me, could I say it all the way through, I'd have said no. But on that evening after the fire, I started to say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though you walk through the valley of death, fear no evil, for I am with you. And at that point, it wasn't like I was speaking, it was like it was speaking to me. And I asked God, is this your voice? Are you telling me you are with me? If you help me, I can believe in you. So I went from that to facing immigration lawyer who told me I would just be deported because I was accused of drugs. I had been accused of the fire. I didn't have work. So I was basically going to be deported. So I came out from the lawyer saying, why, God, did you tell me that you're with me, but I don't feel it and know it? And at that point where the lawyer told me I'd be deported, again, scripture, the voice from the Bible, whom I now know is God, his living word, spoke, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And I don't know if you know this, but that is the very words that Jesus spoke on the cross. And that spoke to me. And I said to God, so you're wanting me to forgive them, but I don't know why they've done it. And from there went a whole pile of events that ended up, I managed to get in a miraculous way, and it's a bit of a long story, so we won't say it all, but in a very miraculous way, I ended up getting a new job as a nanny. And while working in that house, my mother, who didn't know anything that was going on, and it had been quite a gap where I hadn't worked, and I had to tell her that I was just looking for a new job, and she thought I was just partying all the time. She kept saying to me, why do you think life's one big party? You have to be serious and get a job. So I didn't tell her the story. So when I did get a new job, she said to me in one phone call, and by the way, your father's cousin know that you're in Toronto. Go and visit them. And oh my goodness, this was my father's cousin who was married to a pastor. And I thought, that's the last place I want to go. However, in a roundabout way, I ended up in their home, and they were so kind to me, and they just helped me. And they gave me a book to read because it was a story very similar to mine. But every night after I looked after the children, I went up to my room and I cried. Every single night I cried about how life now, I didn't enjoy it. I used to be able to go out with my friends, have a good party, a good dance, lots of things, and it just didn't have any more enjoyment for me. I worked with a family now who were good to me, but so were the last family, and they accused me of burning down their house. So I lost trust of people, I lost my zest for life. But in this book I learned about this lovely girl who her boyfriend had planted drugs on her, and she ended up in prison, and she became a Christian. So I searched in the book where she became a Christian, and I realised she talked about that when she saw that she was separated from God because of sin, that she had to come near to God to pray to him to forgive her sins. And when she asked Jesus to come and live in her heart, she was free and she found freedom. Now, I don't know about you, but perhaps we all pray at certain times as believers or unbelievers. But I hadn't prayed much, except with a lovely grandmother who, when I was a child, taught me to pray. But that night, when I wanted to pray and felt I had to pray, I had to remember, how do you pray? And I remembered my grandmother, who I caught often when I was staying with her, praying beside her bed. So I just did that. I went down on my knees and I asked God to forgive me. And if I could, would he come into my heart and help me to live for him and to become a Christian? I think I prayed something like that. There was no order to it, but I do remember doing this. I prayed, I think if I have to be a Christian, I need a Bible. I don't have a Bible. Please, God, can you give me a Bible? And please, God, if I become yours and live for you, will you make all these crimes go away? And the very next morning I got up and I started to work, and the phone went, and I answered it, and it was I'll always remember, he said, this is the Chief Inspector of the Metropolitan Police of Toronto, and we're phoning to tell you you are innocent, 100% innocent. Now this had been over a period of 3 and a bit months, so this came at such an amazing time. And then I phoned my aunt to let her know that I was okay and that I'd prayed and that I had met Jesus. But you know, sometimes when you answer God, and especially right at the beginning, there is a devil who lives and is alive and wants us not to be Christians, and will put every stumbling block in your way that you don't give your life to Jesus. And when I went to pick up the phone, the first voice that came to me was, you're not a Christian. You do this, you do that. What have you ever done? But what came out when my aunt answered the phone was, I said, it's a lovely day. And she said, yes, it is. And I said, but not the weather, not the weather. And then this is what she said. She said, Rona, I've been thinking for quite some time that I should give you a Bible. Would you like a Bible? Do you remember the prayers? Make me innocent, and can I have a Bible? So it was instantly answered, and I knew, because of the peace. I had never, ever experienced that peace in my life from that first night when I went on my knees and asked Jesus into my heart. So yeah, that's when I met Jesus, at that point when I cried out and asked him to come into my life.
Now, some people listening to that, Rona, will say, obviously you prayed the very next day. You know, some people might say, is that just not coincidence? Those things just happened. Was that for you so important? And do you feel that it sealed your faith for the future as well? Do you feel that that's been your experience in the next 30 years, say, that things happen, that God plans, and it confirms for you that God's real? How do you know still God is real?
Well, starting from that journey point, that I didn't share it all, but if there was coincidences over that 3.5 months, there must have been 30. So I started to question, it can't be coincidence. And the lawyer that actually did take my case happened to be the top lawyer in immigration in Toronto, simply because she knew my new employer. Prayer. That prayer was answered very quickly, but God had that in mind. And it wasn't the answer to prayer. I actually didn't notice, but I expected when I prayed that God would answer. But when I prayed at night, that peace that came into my life is what convinced me that God was real. Not the answer to my prayer, that was a joy, because I first met Jesus in the peace that came when I prayed. And secondly, when he answered that, I felt that was a reassurance, but that's not what convinced me. Where I met Jesus was at the point when I knew I was a sinner in need of Jesus. I had never recognized that ever before.
Must have been massive as well when they said you're innocent. How did they know you're innocent? And perhaps then, as you tell us that as well, just how did you feel to find out what had really happened?
So when they told me that I was innocent, he went on then to share that my employers had totally set me up, that they were basically scammers, that they had swindled about $1 million out of their company that they worked for, and that they had obviously arranged to burn the house down. And they had set me up as the alibi. They made out that I was a criminal, and they said that I had been very, very using drugs in their house, and they had asked me to leave, and I wouldn't leave. So they made it look like I had a revenge. I was wanted to be revengeful to them, when all the time they actually wanted the house burnt for the insurance money. So they worked all that out, and he actually went to prison, and she was spared because of the children. But they were both very much in it together. So it was like they had employed me for this whole purpose.
Wow.
So,
and I mean, that is betrayal, isn't it? You'd love this family, you'd worked for them, you'd served, and maybe people here haven't necessarily had that exact experience, but betrayal is a very real thing, isn't it? And the emotions that come out, you've talked about forgiveness, the forgiveness you've known. How did you deal with that betrayal, and have you found a place of forgiveness?
yeah, I think for me, that's a very good question, because that's a question I often get asked. I think for me, in the whole journey of it, the saddest part was that I absolutely could say 100% I loved that family, and I absolutely loved the children. She had the baby while I was there, and I nursed that baby through the night. I got up in the night with the baby, and I absolutely loved these children. It was loss for me that I would never see them again. So from the day that I knew I'd never get to cuddle them again and everything, that was big. And the whole betrayal thing hurt so deeply. But I wonder, for me, I told you I lost all my stuff in the fire. Some people would have no hassle with that. But I really loved my belongings. And I didn't know how much I loved them. I really loved them. So God took away all that I loved, really. He took away all the things I loved. And he took away my assurance that I really was a very happy, and the world was a beautiful place, and everybody was just wonderful. He took that from me, and he took away my work, and then he took away my reputation. And when you're stripped of the things that you believe make you, then you have to question, who am I? And I didn't have to question before that, who am I? So when I met God, I was 100% convinced that's why I was put on this earth. I am meant to follow you, and you give me life, and you're going to give me life, and I have purpose now, and I know where I'm going. Before that, I thought I was in charge of all that, and I was doing a pretty good time of it. I had a good time, and I was leading my life really wonderfully. And so I was not looking for a new life, but all these things were stripped from me. How did I forgive them? I was just so thankful I really wasn't a criminal. And I really felt sorry for the children, that their father went to prison. And the police and my family wanted me to, of course it was Canada, like America. I had the opportunity to sue them for defamation of character, but I chose not to, because I felt like I'd been given so much more. And the only thing I did do with the recommendation of the lawyer was to put such a complaint in that they would never again be allowed to employ, in case they would ruin somebody else's life. So after it was all over, I wrote my parents and I told them that, first thing I think I did was I told them that I had become a Christian. And the reaction from my family was, well, my two sisters thought that was a big joke, and they said they just couldn't believe that I would have ever become a Christian. And my parents came out to Canada after that, and they spoke with all the people. So my mother and father were truly thankful for the family that had employed me, and they came over to specially thank them. And and when they listened to the whole story, they were quite amazed. And but both my parents since then, over the years, they have come to know the Lord. So I think for me, when I share that I know Jesus, I want people to know that the most important thing is that you know Jesus as your Savior, and that it's about a personal relationship, because I think you might remember I did say I believed in God, but I think it's different. And do you know what I wish? I wish when I was younger they told me how amazing and wonderful is Jesus. Because if you look at people in the church, that's right off-putting. And all the different churches, it's a bit of an off-put, isn't it? But you know what? You'll never be disappointed with Jesus. And Jesus gives you the love for that amount of odd people that are around our churches. Me too, I'm odd. But you know what? When you love Jesus, he gives you the grace to be together and to shine for him. Because to know Jesus, there is nothing greater. He will never let you down. He will never disappoint. I've not had a perfect life. I've gone on to many different things and had challenges, but he has never left me. And he promises never to leave us. So Jesus, look to Jesus, not to people.
Okay, brilliant. That sounded like a good moment to conclude, Rona. We'd just like to collectively say a massive thank you to you for really sharing your part of your story with us tonight. Thank you.